By using my showbiz flair and getting the George Bush Senior administration to donate food, I knew there was no media outlet in the world that could resist. I was kind of pulled towards helping to start a movement that wanted to do more than just feed people. Instead of being perennial recipients of well-intended charity, they could be part of the solution.
The opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it's conformity.
Let's meet the need, but let's meet it in a way that rebuilds the economy. Let's get it on. Let's make something happen, which has always been my mantra. The President of the United States just donated food. You can too.
Hello and welcome to the Positive Development Podcast. My name is Bart Colen and this is my co-host Dante Ciolfi.
Hello.
Positive Development Podcast explores the shift from sustainable development's frequently cautious approach of do less harm to positive development's more forward-leaning and optimistic approach of do more good. Each week we engage with professionals from diverse fields, exploring innovative yet practical ways in which individuals and organizations can amplify their impact through positive development. We do this by asking questions relating to three key principles. 1, a shift in mindset. 2, the practical application of do more good approaches. And 3, the global replicability of such approaches. So this week we are very, very pleased indeed to have with us Robert Egger. I know already, just based on the research that we've done in advance, the emails that we've shared back and forth, and also the conversations we've had prior to starting the recording, this is going to be a really interesting and engaging chat. And one thing I do want to point out to our viewers, as well as Robert himself, is the fact that part of the reason that we're having this podcast is not just to learn about our guests, but it's actually to learn from our guests. And I realize and fully appreciate the fact that we live in a time of a great deal of uncertainty and a great deal of stress and worry, to be quite honest. But this podcast, in its own humble way, is aiming to be a safe space for you, the viewers, our guests like Robert and Dante and me as presenters, to provide a safe space in which it is permitted to be optimistic. So rather than going into a lengthy intro into Robert's background, his in terms of what he has done, I would rather, if you don't mind, Robert, you provide us with a little bit of intro in terms of what your background is, what led you to do the work that you did, and what the structure of DC Central Kitchen was.
Okay. Well, dudes, I'm so honored to be here. And again, Bart, that introduction, man, this conversation is going to be hand in glove. We are really very, very simpatico because, again, there's the classic idea of like, I hope this works, and the trepidation sometimes of movement forward versus no, let's get it on. Let's make something happen, which has always been my mantra. So from a chronological perspective, I was a young man who always wanted to open a nightclub. I studied, while friends and associates went off to college. I went to work in nightclubs in Washington, D.C. in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, and really approached it with a vigor of a young student who really wanted to absorb everything because I really wanted to change the world with the power of music. But I eventually, for a lot of different reasons, the least of which was the kind of explosion of homelessness on the streets of every city in America, but more poignantly in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, I was kind of pulled towards helping to start a movement that wanted to do more than just feed people. I was a volunteer who went out on a truck, served people on the streets of Washington, right in front of the White House. And that night, the first night I went out, it happened to be raining. And so that night, from the warmth of a truck, I served people, fellow citizens, out in the rain. And that did not sit well with me. And I thought, this is traditional charity. I respect its intent. I know there's love in its heart, but it's not just. This is about more the redemption of the giver, not the liberation of the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to flip that script. So I offered ideas to charities around DC, but I found that they were too wed to their historic missions and unwilling to adjust. So I started the DC Central Kitchen in 1989 with food donated from the inauguration of George Bush Sr. as our first official act. And again, they'll set the stage, and I don't want to interrupt my chronological kind of bona fides, but it was very important because there was an urban myth that you still hear that, oh, restaurants can't donate food, it's illegal. It's never been illegal. But I knew that myth existed. So by using my showbiz flair and getting the George Bush Sr. administration to donate food, I knew there was no media outlet in the world that could resist donated food going to the homeless. And that enabled on day one, not only for me to get tons of food donated, and not just a lot of media for my immediate program, but I spread almost on day one this echo across the country that the President of the United States just donated food. You can too. It's not illegal. So I started DC Central Kitchen in 1989, and over the course of 25 years, developed it into a program that was earned about 60% of its own income, had pioneered multiple different avenues, job training for men and women who are coming out of homelessness, addiction, or incarceration, social enterprise, school food, senior meals. I then went to, let me stop. I wrote a book called Begging for Change that was awarded the McAdams Prize for Nonprofit Book of the Year. That really challenged some of the underlying ideas of charity. And why do we behave the way we do? Why do we act meek and subservient when we're in fact the third biggest employer in America? We should own that economic power and be proud of our collective work. I helped kitchens open around the country, over 100 different kitchens, and we were always open source, which means we never charged people for money for or knowledge or to come visit us. It was all whatever we have, because I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm going to have more visibility and more money than most groups are going to have. I'm going to share anything I get with those in Wichita who are never going to have a president donate food.
Right.
But then I went out to Los Angeles and helped open the LA kitchen. The idea was, let's be pioneers in senior nutrition. Nowhere in the world are we prepared for the number of seniors that are coming. And we should be really vibrantly experimenting, not only what nutrition looks like, but what does it look like to include more elders in our society, as opposed to just kind of saying, you're old, you're ugly, you're used up, you're spent, go away and die quietly somewhere. In the middle of this, I also partnered with my longtime friend, Jose Andreas, to launch the World Central Kitchen, which has done activisms and disaster relief right now as we speak, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in California, whether it's in North Carolina, whether it's in Africa. There's so many different places in which we are, again, not just feeding people, but going back to our underlying discussion today. Wherever World Central Kitchen goes, the principle is we buy local food, we hire local chefs, and if we can, even local food trucks. The idea being, let's meet the need, but let's meet it in a way that rebuilds the economy simultaneously by, again, giving people who are already there. They know the community. They know the taste, the traditions. Let's hire them and pay them to do what they do best, which is cook and care for their community. So collectively, the organizations that I've been involved with or started have done over 500 million meals, which is kind of bonkers, primarily made with food that was already there. The DC Kitchen has probably trained well over 2,000 men and women for jobs at this point. And again, I continue to speak on behalf of the larger nonprofit sector and our undeniable yet undervalued role in the American economy.
Whoa. Okay. So there is a lot there. My first question before we get into the, I don't want to say typical, but the customary questions we ask our guests. Before we get into that, can you just explain if it would come from two different angles, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because this podcast, you as our guest, this is your platform, not ours, as far as we're concerned. But can you explain how that concept would work if I were a homeless person who is hungry and or a person seeking employment? And you don't have to go into tremendous depth if you don't care to, but just a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of the mechanics, the X's and O's of how it actually works.
Well, the idea percolated on that night I mentioned in the rain serving people because the group I work with purchased all the food. Now, again, I worked in nightclubs, and part of what I wanted to do in my learning curve, I didn't want to book bands. I wanted to put on shows. I grew up, I think, luckily in an era where I was almost nightly entertained by variety shows where, and again, for your younger audience members, I don't want to sound like an old boomer, but dudes, the level of talent that was on our TVs nightly, whether it was Johnny Cash or Ray Charles, or, it was a riot. And it was bam, bam, bam show. It wasn't like, Johnny Cash sang for half an hour. It was Johnny Cash sang, then he did a skit, then he did, it was variety hour. And I love that format, and that's what I wanted to do. But to do that, I had to understand the back of the house, which was how much did it cost to buy food, pay the staff, get it onto a plate, serve it, get paid for it, pay your taxes, the whole ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And that revealed to me how much food was thrown away in restaurants every night. It was just part of the business model. In fact, for those of you who don't know it, every time you buy anything, there's part of the cost that you pay covers loss. So every time you get a burger, you're paying for the burger that somehow didn't get sold a week before. So not only was I aware from a restaurant or a nightclub perspective, but a lot of my friends in the kind of go-go 80s had gone to work in catering. And they were lamenting about how much food they were throwing away at 2 o'clock in the morning because there was no place to take it. So on the way home from serving people that night, I thought to myself, wow, if you could find a way to get the restaurants, the hotels, the hospitals, farmers who have food they don't want to throw away, they just don't want to get sued. So you can find a way to safely collect that food. Wow, you can feed more people better food for less money. Smart business. But I was so struck by those men and women out in the rain and how many of them I had conversations with who were much different than my kind of bigoted or prejudicial mind had pictured homeless people. And so the conversations revealed to me that many of the men and women I encountered that night were perfectly lucid and capable. So I thought, well, what if you brought it to a central location where you could start a cooking school for the homeless? And that way you could not only feed more people better food for less money, but you could shorten the line by the very way you served it by being respectful and giving people an opportunity to, instead of being perennial recipients of well-intended charity, they could be part of the solution. And so while they were learning, they could in turn produce meals for the people who were still out on the street to help them come in. So again, you'd get a much more beautiful loop. Less food would be wasted. More people would come out the streets. And at the time, there was, and I used some business for this. I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and asked them about growth in the restaurant industry. And they said there's going to be a 35% increase in food service jobs over the next 15 years. So I could then go to funders, and when they'd say inevitably, Robert, we know you mean well, but restaurants were not going to hire people who are homeless or addicts. And anybody in your audience who has ever worked in a restaurant knows that the restaurants, the back of a kitchen is like the island of misfit toys. Anthony Bourdain celebrated the square pegs that make up restaurant kitchens. So it's like, believe me, restaurants, they have jobs and they have need. I'll just ask restaurants to help me develop the curriculum so that the men and women who come out of our job training program are prepared for jobs that they have. So the idea was, okay, day one, we started getting food. Now, no one had ever done this before, so we were making it up as we went. And we didn't have a lot of time for men and women to spend weeks, months in a culinary program. We were just trying to say, look, basic knife skills, be a certified food handler, show up on time. Those are the three things any employer wants. And quite frankly, 90% just want somebody to show up on time.
Yeah. Okay.
But we started saying, and this was interesting because I started using media. You know what's interesting, dudes? I dreamed all my life of changing the world with music and theater and comedy and a nightclub. Yet when asked to go out in my own backyard and serve people who were homeless, I balked. I was nervous. But when I started the kitchen, I still, for the longest time, dreamed that I'll just get it started and then I'm going to go back to run nightclubs. That's my chosen field. But I realized very quickly that the kitchen became my nightclub and food became my music. And I realized that as cable television evolved, you could attract 24-hour news. Again, remember, dudes, I'm picking up food from big, sophisticated parties in D.C. and then making it up, kind of building as I go a job training program for the homeless. It was Media 101. They loved it. So that attracted a generation of chefs who wanted to donate food, but they were a little bit hesitant about employing people like me. They had prejudices and bigotries and stereotypes. So I started saying, kind of cleverly, a wise chef, would you come down and help teach? That way I got them into the kitchen and they could see organization, structure, dedication, professionalism. And then it was an easy jump for them to say, I want to hire more people. That's how I ended up becoming lifelong friends with Jose Andres. He was a young chef who came to D.C. and wanted to volunteer. And he had never, ever seen a program that used food so purposely. So to get back to the mechanics, on a daily basis, food would come in. We tried to give it a minimum 24, but 30-hour turnaround before it was back out. Because again, tick, 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 time and food is an enemy.
Right.
So we wanted to get it in and out, time and temperature, make sure it was safe. We would mix and match. So again, we'd get rice from one restaurant, vegetables from a farmer, and the job training program grew around the organic process of converting all that food into balanced meals, which then we would distribute to different shelters, after-school programs, drug treatment programs, again, trying to incentivize people to come to their programs because it was better meals than most anybody else served. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts. We very early on were producing 5,000 meals a day, never closed. The DC kitchen has been open 13,200 and some plus days. And again, pretty much 5,000 meals a day. But by 1996, we started launching our own businesses. And that's a whole nother discussion.
Well, again, okay, there's a lot there, so I'm having to restrain myself here.
Dude, it's your show. You lead out.
Well, yes, but it's our show, but it's your platform. So what I would like to do on the back of that, I think, before jumping into a question I think Dante might have, which might provide some more context to this, is just to let you know, regardless of the questions we ask or don't ask, what I would really like to do overall is create a format in which you feel comfortable not just having to trot out prepared answers, standard questions which you've been asked 1,000 times. If there are questions, I mean, this is a question as an aspiring interviewer, I've always dreamed of asking guests is, what's the best question you've never been asked? So if at any point throughout this, you feel like you want to go off in a given direction that has nothing to do with what we're asking, this, while you are here as our guest, this is your platform. But
appreciate that.
Yeah, and believe me, it's very sincere, because our interpretation of what you've done is infinitesimal compared to your knowledge and experience. And,
But you know what, Dante? I mean, Bart, one of the things I love doing, though, is I want people's heads to rock a little bit. And so I understand that this came very natural to me. It's interesting. And a lot of it, quite frankly, was born, and the three of us can relate. I was born a white dude in America, which I think gave me huge confidence. And I think that's very underestimated in success. People always say, what was hard about opening DC Kitchen? And I always want to say, it's like, I'm a white dude in America. What's hard? I mean, sure, I had to climb some fucking hills, but I had the confidence to say, I'm going to call up the White House and get food donated from the President of the United States. So again, there's that sense of confidence that I'm very grateful for. But I know that sometimes I lovingly put out a plate of ideas, and it really does give you a lot to chew on. So I understand that you or Dante might have a lot of questions from that little soliloquy I just put out.
Well, definitely. I just to give you, again, a little bit of context, and we talked about this before we started out here, just to reiterate the structure, just because I think it's a natural progression of the way the mind works. It's the three pillars that we tend to focus on with our questions is a shift in mindset, because any shift from the way it's always been done to the way it's never been done to the way we didn't even realize it could be done, obviously all that starts in the mind. So that's generally the starting point there, and then it goes into, okay, what's the practical application of that, and then how can we take what has been done and has worked and which is outside the box, how can that be, if not scaled, at least replicated globally?
Just to climb in real quick, it's also, I think it's more in other people's minds. In other words, I can think it up all I want. And in fact, I talk to a lot of social entrepreneurs now who want to tell me about their product.
Right.
I'm really excited about that. It's like, I don't care about your product. Who's your customer? And similarly, as I alluded to, and I was genuflecting a little bit to your pillars, because the idea of DC Kitchen and its evolution was my own mind had to change, but I knew I had to change other people's minds by the way I did my business. My business evolved because everything I did was like, it made sense, but it was like, what's the fastest way I can get the average person who might see me on TV, come in to volunteer, a president who might come in and do a Thanksgiving thing. How can I get their minds to change quickly? So much of what I've been done is, to your point, is, you can have a great idea. There's that old saying, if you're a leader and no one's following you, you're just taking a walk. So that idea of how can I,
right.
Most of my ideas are the first thing I'm thinking about is, how will this change a hardened heart, a stifled brain, a limited imagination? How will this open a doorway as quickly as possible? Because tick, 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 every day 10,000 people turn 70. Every day less food is donated. Mm-hmm. That's one of the, I think, things that I think the three of us share, is that the tyranny of time, man. We don't have time to dawdle, it's one thing to debate and measure success and calculate where you went wrong, but it's like faster, better, more. So, but I just wanted to give that gentle nudge that my business has always been about somebody else's mind, not mine. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Because
again, I'm a salesperson. My father, years ago when I was a kid and I graduated high school, and I barely graduated high school, my dad pulled me aside, literally on graduation night, pulled me aside, son, come here. And he gave me that look like, okay, Pop, I know you're going to do, here comes the big daddy kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, son, you should really be a salesperson. You're really good at talking. And I was insulted. I'm like, what? Why would you say that to me? Why would I want to be a salesperson? He was right. I'm just selling different ideas about food, people who are homeless, profits, our society, what's the existing resource. So again, a lot of what I try and do, there's a big hunk of huckster, itinerant preacher, of the music man, if you want to go back to old musicals.
Right.
I'm a hustler. I'm a huckster. I'm trying to get people to buy a new idea.
But that's interesting, though, because do you feel, and again, I really want to be cautious about not putting words in your mouth at all, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that it's not just about you recognizing a certain issue and a certain approach which can help to address that issue, but it's also figuring out how to convey to other audiences, not so much getting them to try to see things your way, but getting them to realize that the things that you're doing and the way that you're looking at certain things actually have very direct positive outcomes for them. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. In fact, if you think about the nuts and bolts of DC Kitchen, I was very impatient about change. So I started looking around, and again, I'm the king of what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were also coming up in the 1990s where suddenly every kid had to do service to graduate school. So it's like, bring them to me. But again, I didn't want to be what I used to recall like a nutritional imperialist. I didn't want to tell people what to eat or what to think. But that idea of we had 3 hours between 9 o'clock when the average volunteer would come in and we'd do an orientation, they'd go out in the kitchen and they'd be terrified. I mean, dude, a kitchen that's going to produce 5,000 meals made out of leftover food, teaching homeless people with knives. So for the average person, they were nervous. And I had a 3 hour window between 9 and noon when the shift ended and the meals were, really going, that we had to get them acclimated, comfortable, and then thinking new ideas. So again, the clumsy way would have been me to say, welcome to DC Kitchen. Here's all the things you're going to experience and what you're going to think when you leave. But we came up with a system that we lovingly referred to as the calculated epiphany, that we were going to set the stage so that just like Robert, shut up. You don't have to sell it. It sells itself. Let them have this experience. And at the end, you could easily say in every single day, same thing. How was your experience? My God, it was so amazing. I was so nervous about men and women are homeless, but I worked next door to Dante all day. And wow, this was so much different than I thought. We had a great time. I feel like I made a friend. I'm coming back. Or wow, I never knew how much food we threw away, but I never thought about how profoundly it could be used to liberate people. So again, it was like, oh, really? Again, I'm just sitting back saying, really? Wow, that's great. Because I knew they were going to go out and they were going to tell everybody because it was their idea. And that, again, I think a strong nonprofit doesn't try and fix the problem. It reveals the solutions that exist in our day-to-day life, the way we think, the way we feel. So, I always said, man, I'm not in the nonprofit business. I'm in the bravery business. My job is to make people brave enough to try new things, think new things, welcome new ideas. Because, dudes, I got this years ago. See this little heart tattoo on my finger here? I got this because it's tempting in life to do this when people don't do what you want them to. And I wanted to remind myself that most people aren't evil. They're not mean.
Right.
They're just afraid.
Yes.
And once you realize that people are just afraid of change, then you're like, cool. My job is to help you overcome your fear and embrace a brave new you, whether it's a homeless person who's come into a program who's never succeeded in anything and has been an addict all their life and has lost family and friends, whether it's a high school student that's terrified of this, whether it's an elected person who wants to think, corporations drive America, nonprofits do simplistic good deeds. The idea was to, in a very short period of time, arm people, almost rob them of their old ideas and give them free, bold, daring new ideas.
There's a quote, I'm not sure if it's from Albert Schweitzer. I suppose it doesn't really matter, but it's a quote I really, really like, which is that the opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it's conformity. And I think that's pretty strong in the work that you did, at least initially, because as we've talked about, and this is a concept I know is near and dear to you, it's the purposeful use of food, and having that calculated epiphany, as you say, is, that's all about a mind shift, getting people to look at something completely differently. And when you do that, I know from my own experience, a whole new world of possibilities open up.
Well, you know what else is, going back to conformity, one of the more interesting aspects of doing the work I do is historically people want to put on your shoulders, understandable but vastly undeserved, angel wings. They want to say, oh, Robert, I love what you do. You're such a saint. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm a sinner. I'm just like you. I'm just a dude who's trying to I was a Boy Scout. I was raised in, going to Catholic schools. I took civics. All of those things led me to believe that I had certain responsibilities as an American, as a human, to leave the world a better place. But there's an old, speaking, we'll trade old sayings. one of my favorites is, I forget the Archbishop's name, but he famously said, when I fed the poor, they called me a saint. When I asked why they were poor, they called me a communist. What's interesting about this dilemma of trying to get people to do change, going back to the calculated epiphany, they would prefer people like me or Jose or others in this world to be saints, because saints are people that allow them to stay where they're at. I could never do that. I'm not a saint. Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Dr. King, they're special humans. They're different. They're not like me. And that sense of trying to desperately say, no, 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 no. I'm gently, I wouldn't say this out loud, but in my heart, I'm saying, I'm not going to let you get off with putting wings on me. And I'm going to make sure that you know that I am a deeply flawed human, But secondly, you have to understand that most people don't want to be told what to do. Going back to that, they'll call you a communist. And we've seen many activists, Bono, for example, with the One campaign. People loved you too. They loved Bono. They didn't want Bono telling them who to vote for. Bruce Springsteen, I'm blanking now. Anyway, all the different entertainers who tried to translate their following and tell them what to do politically or where to buy their stuff. Very difficult. So that's the interesting line, I think many of us, then the next level up of social change. The first level is, your immediate business to the people you work with. So DC Kitchen was about, I can do this right here. I can do really great work. And I was happy there. But then the second phase, I think, was the broader community. And I want to touch on, while we're jabbering here, another aspect that you mentioned in your lead in, which is replication. A lot of people would see us on TV or come to visit, and they'd see, even though it was in the basement of the biggest shelter in America, we had a pretty big kitchen, not the kind of fit kitchen most people could find. But my mantra was always, everything we need is already there. So from scratch, we took the food our society threw away. We took the food the people our society undervalued. We took a kitchen that was underutilized. We took chefs who had food that they would donate, but they also had knowledge and they had jobs. We took a generation of people who had to volunteer and were looking for a place to do mighty work. We took agencies that desperately wanted to redirect their limited charitable donations to doing something equally powerful, not buying food. And most importantly, we took men and women who wanted to be part of the solution and wanted to contribute and be part of something bigger than themselves. All that was there. I get too much credit when all I did was to take existing ingredients and move them around. I'm not a chef. I'm what I lovingly refer to as a social chef. A chef is somebody who can come into your house and look in your cabinet that you swear is bare and make a masterpiece. And you're like, how did you do that? There was nothing in the cabinet. I can do that with a city. I can come in and you think your cupboard's bare, you have no idea how rich you are. So the big idea was saying anybody can open a kitchen in any city. And this is why there were so many, the community kitchen movement grew, is because, again, everything you need was already there. At one point, I realized that a group, the kind of first generation of kitchens that were mirrored or modeled on our work were reaching the point where they wanted to build a new kitchen. And it's like, oh, that's a lot of money to take out of the local economy. And I started looking for, where can we find a free kitchen? And I've always enjoyed the metaphorical walking with your head tilted, trying to see the world a little askew, so that you're not seeing things as everyone else does. And I was in rural Indiana visiting my folks who had retired there, and I noticed there was a brand new high school. And it's like, wow, there's a brand new cafeteria they just built in there, and it's going to be closed all afternoon, all night, and all weekend. And there's 60,000 school cafeterias in America. And that begat a program we did called Campus Kitchens, which eventually ended up on 80 campuses around the country and really launched the student-led hunger relief movement. But that idea of what's already there, that's a big part of what I do. But again, I just wanted to go back and fill in some blanks for people to understand that there was a tactic that I employed, that, I wanted to do really powerful work in my own ecosystem, but I wanted to use things that existed anywhere so that other people could basically take the same idea and make it their own in their own community. And then at the same time, awaken people to that idea of like, what else is there that we might use differently. And that's very much what led me to the idea of launching our own businesses in the 1990s.
It's among the many things that what you just said makes me think of is he's not at all known in this country, but very extremely well known in Britain, and he probably doesn't have an analog in American society, but there was, above all in the 1960s, an exceptionally gifted comedian called Peter Cook in Britain.
Yeah, yeah.
You do know Peter Cook?
Ian Dudley Moore.
Oh my God. Oh, don't get me started, because I fell asleep last night watching old Pete and Dud sketches.
Yeah, dude, but comedy is a brilliant vehicle.
Well, it is a brilliant vehicle, and with you knowing who Peter Cook is, you will really appreciate this, because someone described him, and in fact, I think the BBC made a documentary with this name, was at a slight angle to the universe. In other words, someone said Peter's genius was that he existed at a slight angle to the universe. In other words, everything was viewed from a slightly askew angle. And even if you're only 1% off, if you increase that triangle far enough, you're so far off the mainstream that you're almost in a parallel universe. And it sounds to me like what you're saying about what you've done is look at things differently in a way. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I find when I look at things differently, because I'm used to looking at things slightly askew, so many things seem so obvious to me that I think, my God, everyone else must have thought of this. They clearly have not, and that blows my mind.
Totally. And the hard part, though, is you can get ahead of your skis with that kind of view, too. And a lot of people might be listening to this and thinking, wow, Robert, you've had a fucking great career, and I have. But when I went to Los Angeles, I wanted to lead by example. I had been at DC Kitchen for almost 25 years, and I didn't want to be a founder who couldn't leave. And I wanted to do something dynamic. And I also wanted to be part of that. The big part of what I do is I use probability. What's the future? There's an old saying, you can't predict the future, but with probability, you can get close. And the example I love to use, which is what I use, which is, baby boomers starting in 2006, started turning 60, and there were 80 million people. What does it look like when 80 million people start to get old? How much are their savings patterns? Where do they live? What kind of resources exist, and what resources will be needed once people start to have different phases of their life? And so that took me to LA with this idea of like, wow, LA has one of the largest concentration of elders in America. We're going to need to redefine senior nutrition. LA, I can get 365 years of the best fruits and vegetables anywhere in the world in Southern California from the fruit and vegetable markets. And the only way to feed this many elders is going to be, you're going to have to replace the traditional piece of meat that is the center of the plate of the American carnivorous diet with something else, because we can't afford to feed this many people meat every day. So you're going to have to not only find an alternative to that, which will be kind of a plant forward, not vegetarian or vegan, although you could experiment with that, but a smaller animal protein footprint and alternate proteins. You have to sell that idea and get a generation of carnivores to eat less meat and appreciate and enjoy a different kind of menu. That's a lot of work.
That's a challenge in and of itself. I mean,
dude, I was
big time.
Man, I was ready for it. I went out there, probably the greatest piece of work I had ever done. And it was going to be the cherry on top of my career. But what I found was nobody wanted to talk about senior hunger. I could go out there all day long with statistics and facts, real things, census data. In fact, I went to people, elected leaders in LA, and said, you're the largest concentration of older people, one of the largest in America. And in particular, you're one of the largest concentration of elder Iranians, Armenians, South Koreans, and a variety of other international groups, which have their own glorious food traditions. And they'd be like, really? And it's like, dude, I grew up in LA because my pop was in the Marines, and we spent a lot of time in Southern California. But it's like, this is basic, census data. How can you not know this? But anyway, to your point, I saw it clearly. No one else saw it, and more importantly, no one really wanted to see it. And this is a little bit of a caution to some of your listeners that it's important to see the future. It's important to have that skewed view. It's important to, again, understand the need to march out and meet the future versus wait for it to come to you. But sometimes people aren't ready for it. And that's one of the hardest things. Like the LA Kitchen was the best work I ever did, but the hardest work. And ultimately I had to close it after 6 years because, I could not, no matter the effort, the salesmanship, the proof, the science of what I was doing, the partners I had, and, we were doing like, emoji bilingual rating cards with all our meals. So seniors could say, I like this, I don't like this. So we could really hear people. We had a senior tasting squad that gave a group of seniors, we had 30 seniors that would come in once a month and we'd try new menus. But I was going up against the enemy, conformity, routine. I always say, man, routine is the enemy. But the Department of Aging and the larger culture of LA was so resistant to anything new. So I just want to, again, caution your readers that while I'm very proud of my career, I've had my ups and my downs. And that's what led me to New Mexico, where I am now, where I am what I lovingly refer to as an elder ally, in that I have taken my lumps. I have gotten more opportunities and accolades than many, and that I deserve. But I've also taken some lumps. So I feel like I'm a great sounding board. So what I like to do, whether it's talking with you handsome devils or anyone who comes knocking on my door, my attitude has always been open source. How can I, without any need for recompense, how can I give you the benefit of my life's experience so that you might take it a little bit further than I was able to go?
Well, on the back of that, one thing that it makes me think of is something I learned in a copywriting course I took a number of years ago. And although I didn't immediately see the benefits of it, and this is a testament to the power of patience, I suppose, and also the power of having your eyes open. One of the things that they talked about in there, and this may sound terribly manipulative, but I don't view it as being manipulative in a negative way, is one of the first ways to go at people when you're discussing things with them is to make them aware of the scale and scope of their problem. And very often it's making them aware of a problem they didn't even realize existed. And then you're expanding that. They're thinking, oh shit, I didn't realize. Oh my God, we've got a problem with this, that, or the other. We've got all this food waste. We've got all these homeless people or whatever. But then you're immediately coming in with the solution and saying, here's a problem you either A, didn't realize you had, or B, if you did realize it, you didn't realize the scale and scope of it. But here is a way that you can address it. And again, I don't see that as being a manipulative thing.
No, it's just salesman 101.
It's salesmanship 101 because it comes back to, and I know I sound like a dictionary of quotes, but I actually listen to these people who say this stuff. One of my heroes was Earl Nightingale, and something that always jumps out at me, and he said it a number of different ways, a number of different times, was, how will the business that you are in now be done in 10 to 20 years? And is there a way for you to do that now? And that's just a mind-blowing concept. Because when I hear you talking, I'm listening to a guy talking continually about seeing around corners, not just what's in front of me, but it's the old idea of going from Microsoft's where do you want to go today to where do you want to go tomorrow. It's being able to see around those corners and anticipate those things. Is that an accurate reflection of the mindset that you've had in your work?
Very much. But again, I will also offer a caveat to your listeners. One of the hardest things about that is when you can anticipate the future. Now let's go back to the movement I've been part of, the prepared food banking, pantries. Any of your guests or any of your people listening, audience, who have been to a pantry or food bank, you have to understand every morsel of food in there represents lost profit. Somebody grew it, somebody manufactured somewhere, and they couldn't sell it. So the American system is donate it to charity. So A, The future is they're going to get smarter and smarter and smarter and shrink waste. Secondly, there is now secondary markets that are coming and saying, man, don't give that to charity. I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar for it. And they'll buy it. So the future for my business or this movement is predictable decline of the availability of food. Now, the food banks and everybody now move a lot of produce, but even produce, which is still the largest source of waste in America, is still going to be industrial farming, followed by households. And it would seem as if, wow, farming, it's an endless supply of sweet potatoes that are bent, oranges that are bruised, but it's not. AI is coming to farms. And it's ticking every day. The supply of food that's going to be donated to give away for free is going to decrease. And then secondly, the number of people who are hungry in America is growing every day. And this is primarily driven by, again, you're seeing a federal workforce being fired, but unemployment, but aging. Every single morning in America, 10,000 people turn 70 every morning. And it's not going to stop for about 10 years. And then they're going to turn 80. A generation that used to predictably die before they took Social Security is now going to predictably live well into their 80s. So supply, demand. This is one of the hard parts about anticipating the future is you're out there, as we just said, trying to say, here's a problem. You don't realize how big it is. Luckily for you, I'm here with a great new idea. The hardest thing in the world to change is somebody's mind and somebody's way of doing business. There's an old saying, I love you and I are trading old sayings. Everybody wants to move the graveyard, but you're not going to get any help from the people on the inside. And that's
I like
kind
that
of
one a lot.
When you want to change institutions, movements, whether it's again, my movement, whether it's, again, food banking, whatever, people are very much locked into a model of we bring it into this big location, we redistribute it. I'll give you, dudes, I had a clarion call when I moved here to New Mexico. And Dante, we're going to get you in here, buddy. You've been kind of the
silent
partner
partner.
on the side. Yeah, man. You've been, who are the two musicians? You're magicians.
I'm loving it. Keep going, man.
Well, I went to a fiesta here in our little village. I live in a very, very small village in rural New Mexico. And every year there's a fiesta. And for those of you who contemplate moving into a small community, you have to kind of be welcomed into a small community, and it's a lot of people think you're just going to move there, but boy, it's your rude awakening if you don't make an effort to be accepted, or if you think people need to hear your opinion when you just moved there. But my wife and sister-in-law and I, we all lived together. We cooked for the village that day. So it's a good way to earn our way in. But it was interesting because here I had spent 30 plus years trying to be as dynamic as I could about where I got food, how I use food to train people, engage volunteers, change policy ideas, expand the idea. Yet, at the end of the day, I relied upon a system of pantries, shelters, senior centers, after-school programs to distribute the meals that I had lovingly produced. Yet, if you realize, you stop and you think, those segregate people. Old people, you eat over there. Children, you eat over there. And food should be about bringing people together. And here I was 30 plus years into my career, and I was out serving people in this little village, and here were all these people eating together on picnic tables out in the middle of the street. And it was the ragtag army of bikers, tweakers, libertarians, retirees, people who would never on any other day hang out. But on this one day, they were all eating together. And I was like, I should have been using food to build community, not just feed people in these silos. And if I could go back in time, that's what I'd do. But you get my point that sometimes it takes pernicious, dedicated, daily examination of am I trapped in a box I don't even see?
Exactly.
Or am I challenging people when they're not really ready yet? So these are just little cautionary nuggets I want to give to your audience because, again, I've been very lucky and I've been very successful in my career, but at the same time, I've run into some real big walls. The Department of Aging in LA did not want to change. The larger food movement in America does not want to change. That idea of, no, you got to use food to liberate people. The longer you keep people coming back every week for more food, it's bondage. You can do it. You can love people to death. Just because there's love in your heart doesn't mean it's pure. And if I could riff for 1 second, going back to New Mexico, I'm a believer in the power of food. And I'll give you a very quick sweep of what I think are some amazing examples of the role food has played in social movements. Thomas Clarkston was a young graduate of Cambridge University, and he had just won the Latin essay contest in the late 1700s. And the subject was, is it wrong to enslave a man against his will? Very esoteric, heady stuff. But he really started to research the slave trade and the way that sugar that was new to England and exciting for the palates of Europe to have sugar, molasses, rum. It was a miracle. And he launched kind of the first boycott when he realized, I've learned all this knowledge. I just wanted to win the Latin essay contest, but I know too much not to do anything. And he decided he was going to be part of the abolition movement, and he launched the first successful boycott, which was the sugar boycott, a giant thing primarily driven by children, too. When Mahatma Gandhi wanted to get the British out of India, he used salt. And it was illegal, you may know this, and your audience may know, but it was illegal for an Indian to go down to the coastline of the Indian Ocean or the Arabian Sea. They're surrounded on two sides by ocean. It was illegal for an Indian to make or sell salt. They had to import salt from England. And Gandhi said to the Indian population, look, we've been fighting for independence for decades, and we've been fighting each other, Muslim against Sikh, Sikh against Hindu, Hindu against Jew, whatever. We've been divided. Salt is a symbol of our combined subjugation. Let us have a salt boycott, the first real modern successful boycott. And again, like the British before and the British again, the idea that sugar or salt and a boycott of that would cause Imperial Britain to either quit importing slaves or give Indians their independence seemed preposterous. It worked. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King took dimes. They only took a dime to ride a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And the idea that dimes and not riding the bus would lead to the end of segregation or the march toward equality seemed preposterous. It worked. Cesar Chavez used the table grape and the idea that we can get migrant farm workers better rights and better conditions if we don't buy grapes. Grapes, dimes, salt, sugar, 4 times. And in this state, the rarely known but legendary Pueblo revolt, where the Puebloan Indians rebelled against the Spanish, they used maguey fiber, which is agave, to create a knotted cord. Their leader, Pope, from the Okeowenge, right up by Taos, Dante, Pueblo, got the not only the Pueblos that fought each other, but also the Navajo, the Apache, different tribes that were all being subjugated by the Spanish to unite. And he gave them a knotted cord, and every day they untied a knot. And when the last knot was untied, that's when the revolution began. So I come from a place where I've seen food used purposely, deliberately, for social movements of justice and equality. So I've always brought with me to my daily work a sense that food is so much more than just gas for the body. It is fuel for a revolution. So that's always been kind of underlying everything I do, is that idea of like, no, I get it. I understand why you're set in your ways. I understand that it's tradition. I understand that it's wrapped up in your faith tradition. I understand that's where your money comes from. But it's not about us. It's about the people who are on the receiving end. And that's where our real purposeful work should be aimed.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything that manifests that better than what you and your wife did in Cerrillos. That's your small community to bring people together with food. I mean, on a practical level, none of us would be here without food. So,
yeah,
that alone should tell us this is the way to do it. But what I like about this pattern in your life, Robert, is you're you're not transforming people by nutrition. You're transforming by changing metacognition, how they view themselves, how they view the possibilities they have before them. And so that's, I guess, I can't put words in your mouth. I can't put thoughts in your head, Robert, but that's what I see as the real metamorphosis that's going on with everyone you've touched. I mean, it really makes me curious, though. I mean, you talk about the calculated epiphany that you implemented in the DC kitchen. So you talked about how you met people where they were, but you allowed them to get the epiphany and I assume because they would then make it part of them, it becomes more ingrained. But I'm curious, was there ever a non-calculated epiphany in your life that said to you, my path in life is altruism? Because you mentioned the wet night in front of the Capitol. You mentioned how impactful that was. But I'm talking about, when did you think to yourself, I want to change the world? I mean, were you 5 years old? Were you in the womb? I mean, take me way back.
Well, dude, we mentioned the 1960s earlier.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I was raised, and I'm a spiritualist now, but I was raised Catholic,
Right.
So from early on, do unto others. And then I was a Cub Scout for a blink of an eye because I couldn't deal with the authority. But again, that idea of you leave your campsite cleaner than you found it. Civics, the idea of your role as a citizen. But dudes, again, man, whether it was the bad things, seeing John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy assassinated, all three didn't even make it to 40. I mean, just young men. And all they were doing was talking about how great it could be if we could move past, gender, generations, race, and work together. Yet they got murdered. And that idea that those ideas are shouldn't die with those men. And then more importantly, and I think more practically, the day-to-day heroes that you saw, I mean, again, whether it was, Marvin Gaye, Bob Dylan, not Sojourner Truth, well, just learning about people. But you think about all the people, man, that, Barbara Jordan, all the different people I heard in my life, musicians with my own ears, dude, or saw. It was I think I went through a phase of being angry with my generational elders because I thought the hippies, by the time I was a young or mid-teenager, 17, 18, disco and cocaine was everywhere. And I thought I was really, frankly, mystified and angry with my generational elders who I felt were like, it's like, dudes, it shouldn't be about, have fun. It's not, doesn't have to be dire, but, dudes, it can't be all fucking dancing and fucking drugs. There's a world out there that needs change. And so that idea of, I just felt really dedicated to what I grew up seeing in the 60s and 70s. And not in some kind of hippie wannabe way, but in a real practical sense of, no, I chose what team I'm going to be on. And I'll be honest with you, the biggest one was Robert Kennedy. I was 9, about to turn 10. We lived in Los Angeles, and my dad woke me up and said, that Bobby Kennedy's dead. That really fucked me up. And when we were young and moved to D.C., and more importantly, when I started going out in my nightclub era, but I worked at night and I had days free. And I used to go over to Robert Kennedy's grave on occasion, inscribed on the wall there in Arlington Cemetery is a quote he gave from a speech in South Africa, in Cape Town at the university, where he said, in effect, every time someone stands up against injustice or for the rights of others, they send forth a small ripple of daring and hope. And from a million different centers, those ripples can come together to form the mightiest waves, wash down oppression. So that idea of like, I chose what team I was going to be on, and it wasn't going to be on Team Lethargy or Team Tomorrow or Team Maybe or Team Shoulda Be. I was going to be on, fuck it. I'm going to be on Team Now, man. So, but again, I really do want to go back. When you have that sense of confidence and destiny, I think it cannot be underestimated. if I was a little kid in school and the teacher said, Rob, what do you want to be? And I could say, I'm going to be a president. I'm going to be an astronaut and president of the United States. She'd say, wow, that's great. She might not have said that to the young girl next to me or the young African-American child next to me. She would have said, you can do that. And I don't think that can be underestimated, because I grew up thinking I could do anything. And there were no limits. So when I thought, I'm going to open a nightclub and change the world with music, didn't seem hard. I mean, think about it. The Beatles came from a little fucking club in Liverpool, and Brian Epstein was a record store manager, so the world seemed like, if you really look at Dr. King was the junior minister, and the older ministers, when they were confronted with Rosa Parks and this movement, were like, I don't want to do this. Give it to the junior minister. Let young King deal with this. It seemed as if when we were growing up, that history just plucked the strangest, unprepared, undeserving people in the world to take leadership roles. So why not me? You know what I mean? So
yeah, and in your response is this power of now vibe, and having experienced the Los Angeles area, of course, you're aware of surf culture and everything else. There's a phrase in surf culture, when in doubt, paddle out. Do you view that as integral to your character? Let's do it now.
The funniest thing you would say this, Dante, because when I was a kid, we lived in Capistrano Beach, and I had a cousin, Roger, and I idolized Roger. He had blonde hair. He had a peace symbol on a piece of leather, around his neck, and he was a surfer, and I fucking loved Roger. And I asked him about surfing once, and it's like, how do you know what to do? And he's like, dude, you can't plan the wave. You just got to ride it. And that was my business. I had over the years, so many different board members who meant well say, we need to do a strategic plan. And I always said, dude, you can't plan the wave. You just got to ride the wave. But I'm shocked that you would bring that up, Dante, because even though there are two sensations I always wished I could experience. One was riding a wave. I never, ever, I've boogie boarded, but I've never really had that experience. And it must be one of the most insane sensations to catch a wave. But the other is to be in a band on stage, and to be in really, and I've grown up around musicians. I still have many, many friends of mine who perform and perform well. So I've always envied that idea of being on stage with a group of people really tucked in, like you would a wave, tucked in a very tight groove. So while I haven't experienced those, I have taken their ethos. There's a friend of mine, Brendan Canty, who was a drummer in a band called Fugazi, a legendary band out of D.C. And he was asked once when he was producing a record, somebody said, do you think that's too loud? And he turned and said, what's too loud? And that's another one. It's like, what's too loud? That's like, what a fucking preposterous construct. So anyway, brothers, we have got a lot of proverbial butter from the duck today, as they say in kitchens. It's been a joy to chat with you, and I think we've given our audience a lot to digest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many, there are so many different directions I could go in with this, but obviously, thank you again. And hopefully, before we wrap this up, are there any things that, because you've done any number of interviews, are there any things that you haven't been asked before, or things where you haven't been given space to discuss in the past, which you might like to touch on here?
Well, you two have been really good. You give me a lot of room, and I'm an old pro. The idea of trying very clearly to articulate what I think I want to get across, but also what I think your audience will enjoy, but also maybe a smidge of needs to hear tossed in. So you've given me an ample room to roam, and a lot of intellectual opportunity here. So I'm very grateful for the time you've allotted me, the questions you gave me. And I would just say to any listener, again, I'm an elder ally. If I can help you on your journey, I'm easy to find. Please feel free to put my email address.
Okay, good.
And, or, I'm Robert Egger on Facebook, even though I don't know if I'm going to stay there much longer, but just, let them know, man, Dante and Bart sent me. So I know kind of where they're coming from. It's not out of the blue. But dudes, I'll talk to anybody anytime. I'm always happy. I've been given lots of gifts, and I've always believed that gifts and money, God gave them to you to pass it on.
Before we conclude here, I just want to say that hopefully for our viewers, but certainly for me, it's going to take me a while to process everything we've discussed today. But I just want to let you know and reassure you that you've helped me in ways that you can't even realize right now. And I say that sincerely because I'm not that nice of a person to say it if it were not true. So
Well,
I appreciate that.
Years ago, I'll give you one little tidbit of advice. Like many people, you really try and embrace humility. I think pride can be a something you don't want to really play with too much. But I had a guy come into the kitchen, one of our students graduated, and he came in and he said, "I really want to thank you," and I'm like, "Oh," and he's like, "Would you just shut up and let me thank you?" And sometimes it's important. You just said you were very kind to me, and I just want to accept that and say thank you, because I think sometimes we are so hard to be humble, and so try so hard to not get a big head about it, that you don't give people a chance and you don't accept when some people genuinely just want to say thank you. So Bart, thank you. Dante, thank you. And to all the audience who stuck with us, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And if there's one final thing, if you don't mind my asking or bringing this up, I just want to see to what extent, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I really don't. But I just am curious to know to what extent this might pertain to you, or has pertained to you or in your thinking, or could pertain to you in your thinking moving forward. But one of the principles behind the idea of positive development is flipping the script. And this is intentionally shifting one's self-talk to go from looking at the state of the world and the issues and their scope and their scale that we're facing, and rather than looking at it and being overwhelmed and thinking, my God, look at everything we have to deal with, it's flipping that script and saying, there's another way to look at this. Instead of saying that we're screwed because we have to deal with all these major issues, we're actually in a position of privilege. Whereas if we do come together, if we are pragmatic, and I admire you hugely for the pragmatism of your work, if we are pragmatic in dealing with these things, but optimistic enough to know that we can deal with these things, we have the privilege, not the burden, but the privilege of being part of that generation that future generations will look back on and say, man alive, thank you that they were there and that they did what they did, rather than looking at the burnt char of a world after a nuclear war with only 10 million people left and saying, fuck, if only they had. Does that make sense? Does that resonate at all with you?
Totally, bro. It's like, again, I think I'm bagging what you're raking. I really do believe that we're in a place where we have more power than we can imagine. This is one of the reasons that I really maybe subliminally I wanted to talk about that idea of the power of food, because I mentioned boycotts and all those different ways in which the boycott changed things. But it's funny, I started studying the idea of boycotts, and the idea they worked. They proved if poor people don't buy salt, grapes, whatever, the power crumbles fast, shockingly fast. So they proved an economic principle, yet they still used the coercive nature. And I'm a positive guy, so I'm intrigued by this idea because DC Kitchen started our own businesses to flip the idea from the boycott to what I call the boycott. The idea of how do you reward behavior? And I think, if anything, the idea of social enterprise, which is nonprofits generating money or businesses that overtly put money back into the community. They redirect more than take. Those should be rewarded. And that if we as consumers, instead of looking for somebody to punish, we look for somebody to reward. Imagine if everybody in America really did purposely start to say, if I'm going to spend my money, and particularly for a younger generation that will not have the resources that my generation had, who could write a check at the end of the year, or it's tax time, I want to get my deduction. They're not going to have that. For them, And I think for many people in the world, the only form of philanthropy left is how they make their money or spend their money, or how they live their life every day. And you can make a case that the traditional model of philanthropy is based on Rockefeller and Carnegie. And that was, I'm going to make as much money as I can in my life, and somewhere near the end, I'll start giving it back to offset the damage I did, making all the money I did. It's not designed to work. So the more pragmatic model is, again, the idea of how can the way I spend my money, the way I live my life, the example I set, the friend I am, the partner I am, the neighbor I am, how can that be? And again, it goes back to the idea of ripples. And I think sometimes we underestimate just the role that kindness can play. Or, again, the pennies it takes to buy something locally versus have the Amazon truck delivered. But that's something I'm very interested in. Yes, Bart, to get back to your question, I think that there's so many things we can do. They might not feel and might not give you that sense of impact. Because sometimes, we want the big explosion. We want the big wow. We want fireworks to go off and conclusions to be reached. Doesn't always work that way. So I think, if anything, we can just be kind of writers of our own symphony, and sometimes just be very happy with the small little solo you give yourself by being a good person. And just, again, I think that probably has a lot more power than we've ever imagined.
I couldn't agree more, because one of the main things, probably the main thing to come away from this chat for me, even if it wasn't one of the main themes that you had intended, is that we live in such a polarized world where people are so wedded to their own side and their own opinions that those become, they're not loose-fitting garments, they're straitjackets. And the pragmatism of your approach is that you almost step outside of those things. You're not drawing things along party lines, so to speak. You're speaking to a more fundamental, pragmatic humanism, and that could not be more the apotheosis of what it is that Dante and I are at least trying to promulgate with positive development. So thank you.
It's funny, dudes. The work I do, people automatically think I do hunger, and I do. But there's a deeper hunger, and that's the hunger for people to belong, to feel like their life matters, that they have a purpose in life. And I think that the more we realize that that's what people are hungry for, then that opens a much bigger door to opportunity. And you realize, again, there's a world of starving people out there, and they're just looking for that invitation to that longer table.
Well, thank you. Before we close, obviously, I want to thank you again. Dante, do you have anything before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you so much, Robert. And I will see you in the land of enchantment at some point in the near future, brother, where I will plant myself. So
right on, Dante. I'll see you then, brother.
Be aware of that.
I will. All right, man. Well, a pleasure, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you very much. And to our viewers at home, thank you for being part of this. And we hope for the best for you, and onward and upward.